Hi everyone, this is the Grain, and today we're going to talk about some current events that have been happening in our nation and our society that really have been heavy on our hearts and our minds. And we think it's important that we talk about what our thoughts are on these situations because, honestly speaking, these points of views are not common among Black people and people in general. And I think this point of view needs to be heard. So, the recent events of the murder of George Floyd and several others have spurred on protests that have led to a lot of change for the good.
Well, has it? Um, I mean, if there's been a lot of protests, actually, I think have kind of devolved into riots at this point. But I'm not sure. I'm not really sure like what changes, positive changes have come from it. Hopefully, some will come from it. I mean, first and foremost, hopefully the officer Chauvin will be prosecuted, for the murder of Floyd, and hopefully he'll get, as much time in prison as possible. But that hasn't happened yet. I think we're still trying to, get the Breonna Taylor situation sorted out. So to this point, I mean, there's been awareness, and I think we had a brief period of time where, like when it first happened, I think everybody was kind of on board with, hey, something this was terrible, something has to happen. It didn't matter if you were black, white, Republican, Democrat. Everybody was on board for a very brief period of time. But then very soon after that, the protests, which started out for a small period of time as being peaceful and making legitimate points, to devolving into just riots. And I think it became co-opted. And we start seeing black businesses being destroyed. We start seeing buildings being burned down for really no reason. And I think what started off as being a sympathetic movement where people, you had people's attention and ears, it became about people trying to push in a whole lot of other agendas and statements that detracted from the overall message of of Black lives and about police brutality and police reform being needed. So, I mean, I hope some good comes from it, but to this point, I haven't seen it outside of the Washington Redskins name being changed. I haven't seen much change for Black people.
Who do you think is co opting the movement?
I think it's kind of a mix of a lot of people. I think there were white supremacists on the right that I think were definitely involved in a lot of the protests early on. I think they wanted to undermine the Black Lives Matter protests after George Floyd shootings, and I think that they had a hand in a lot of the destruction that was going on to make Black people look bad during the protests. But I also think there's been a lot of far left um, Antifa types that have also had a role in all this. So I think one of the things you saw when the protests first started, you saw a lot of like graffiti that was out there and a lot of symbolism that's typically used by socialists and used by Antifa. And those things were being used during their initial protests. Yeah, so I think you had a lot of people on the far left too. A lot of the Antifa that kind of co-opted a lot of the movement, and to try to push their own agenda, which is really to try to undermine capitalism, undermine the U.S., destroy a lot of our traditions and values. And these things really aren't. It's not about trying to help Black people. Because if it was about trying to help Black people, you wouldn't see those Black businesses be destroyed. Um, and you wouldn't see the violent protests, because we've seen throughout history that peaceful protests in the U.S. for especially for Black people, it does prove it does have benefit, it does work, it does produce results, but what happens is when you're having like a lot of violence and having things being burned down, is it provides sort of credence for those people who are against the movement and say, hey, see, those folks are violent, and there's a reason why we need police to crack down on these folks, because you see what they do, they destroy things, and so it takes away from the message. So I think there were just other agendas that were out, when that, when the protest started, and definitely now. I mean, you look at Portland, look at some of these other, places, Seattle with, when CHOP was going on.
What's
I,
CHOP?
well, yeah, CHOP. So basically, when you had the protesters sort of taking over downtown Seattle, and trying to have a no police zone, and you had a lot of citizens who lived in that area who were complaining about all the noise that was being made and all the violence that was going on, and you had some killings that happened during that whole time. And the mayor at that time, I think Jenny Durkin, she wasn't willing to do anything to stop it. She basically was saying this is going to be a summer of love, and the protesters letting them do their own thing or whatever, and she wasn't stopping it in spite of the complaints that were coming from that area. And yeah, you had people, black people. There were black people who got killed during that whole thing. And then when you try to have the police and the medical, the hospital, the emergency staff, the medical hospital, whatever, come in and try to save these people, the CHOP folks would not allow them through, or they wouldn't allow the police through. And the medical staff, they needed the police to kind of escort them in to keep them safe, but they wouldn't allow the police in. And so then all of a sudden, the CHOP people had to just take these folks to the hospital themselves, and they didn't make it in time, and they ended up dying. And so I think those are the kind of stories we're not hearing enough of, which is, yes, there's police brutality out there, and that's something that has to be dealt with and has to be reformed. But we have much bigger problems in society. You have to have police because people can't just obviously can't police themselves. Um, so I think those things that's no longer about Black Lives Matter at this point. I think it's more about trying to disrupt society. It's about trying to throw out capitalism, which is what, if you look at the Black Lives Matter organization, part of their mission is to pretty much break up not only break up the patriarchy, break up nuclear families, but they've said themselves they're trained Marxists. The founders have said they're trained Marxists, and that's one of their goals. And Marxism is not something that's good for black people. It actually has racist, history behind it. But what do you think?
What Before we get into what I think, what is Marxism?
I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but I think really what you're going back to is Karl Marx, right? And his Karl Marx was, he was a socialist, and it's the whole idea of basically the state pretty much determining, how to allocate resources for everyone. So it's sort of like saying, okay, well, we're going to allocate resources based on who needs what. So, like, okay, well, it's not like you work hard to make as much money as you can as a doctor because people are paying you because you provide a highly needed service. It's saying, okay, well, you work, but you're working really because society needs that, and the government is going to determine, you know, I guess how much money you should make for the service you're providing. Or if the government says, okay, well, actually, you know what, there's more of a need in this area, so we're going to divert more funds over here. And the whole idea is to kind of keep everyone somewhat, I guess, in theory, keep everyone equal. Everyone's making similar money, regardless of your skill, regardless of what you do. But the downside of all that is that in order to keep everybody quote unquote equal, you have to have some government or some authority to make everyone equal. And what it really does is it makes everyone weaker, and it empowers whatever that entity is that is sort of controlling all that. And that's where and then it eventually ends up going into dictatorships, because you got to have someone who's sort of this all powerful being to keep everybody in line. And as we all know, government's very corrupt. So that becomes corrupted, and you basically just cripple and weaken the society. And that's why you fall into communism. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I do agree with you in that I believe from the information that I've learned about the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Black Lives Matter organization, I must say, is that they have a lot of agendas that might not necessarily have African American people
Not even
at
a
the
might. It's actually the
forefront.
exact opposite. These are actually things that cripple the black community. I mean, you start talking about things like, the quote unquote destroying the patriarchy. If anything, black people, we need more black fathers in the household. Because one of the things that was done during slavery is they made a concerted effort to, try to kill and destroy the black man, to try to separate him from his family, because they knew that would weaken, the race as a whole. So talking about destroying the patriarchy, if anything, the black people are ran by a matriarchy right now. And so it's kind of like, if you look at anytime you have a civilization or a community or a country or anyone that tries to take over another country or take over another group of people, the first thing they want to do is the whole goal is to try to kill off the men. So they always kill off the men. They always kill off the boys, so the boys don't grow up to become men that can become threats to the conquering, civilization. And so that's one of the things that was done during slavery, is they wanted to weaken the black man. They wanted to kill off the black man. They wanted to separate him from his family, in order so that they wouldn't become a threat, to the white establishment. And so, so if we're talking about an organization like Black Lives Matter, and one of the things they're talking about is destroying the patriarchy. Well, that sounds to me like people who don't really know the black experience. It sounds to me like people who maybe, if you're talking about the white community or the white society, that might be something where, okay, you could say, white men have had a significant advantage over white women, and they want to do something to overthrow that or whatever. I don't even agree with that, but maybe you feel that way about that. But you really understand the black experience in this country, that hasn't been the case. If anything, there's been a concerted effort by society to put the black woman over the black man, in part, I think, to kind of weaken and destabilize the community. And so I think that's why we have a lot of the issues we have right now. If you talk about the fact that, as I mentioned, if you talk about the communities we're in, the gang investment in these communities, a lot of that does stem from single parent households and not having men around to protect those communities, and to raise these young boys so they don't feel the need to join gangs and become involved in that kind of activity. So to me, that's just something that shows that this organization does not really have the best interest of black people, or they don't understand what black people in this country currently need. Because if anything, we need stronger men, and we need a more of a balance between the men and the women in our communities. Because right now it's very heavily matriarchal, and we need to have more of a balance. So
Right. I definitely agree with what you're saying. And looking at the Black Lives Matter organization's website, I am starting to question what exactly this organization is, what their agenda is, and what they mean by some of the language that they put in their About Me, What We Believe section. So I'm pulling up their information right now, and under on the website blacklivesmatter.com, under the tab we believe, this is what they state. 4 years ago, what is now known as the Black Lives Matter Global Network began to organize. It started out as a chapter based, member led organization whose mission was to build local power and to intervene when violence was inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. I wonder what the state and vigilantes mean, and not to be facetious or um, like contradictory. I just want to understand what they mean by the state and vigilantes. In the years since, we've committed to struggling together and to imagining and creating a world free of anti Blackness where every person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive. So that's their opening statement. And then they go further to call out anti Black racism. They talk about the death of Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and some other um, events that led to the establishment of Black Lives Matter. Some of the information that I read on the blacklivesmatter.com website under what we believe is a little jarring. So I'm going to read some of this information, and you let me know what you think about some of the agenda items that are listed on this page. Every day, we recommit to healing ourselves and each other, and to co creating alongside comrades, allies, and family a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported. I'm going to start that over. So they say in their mission statement, every day we recommit to healing ourselves and each other, and to co creating alongside comrades, allies, and family a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported. We acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities. We work vigorously for freedom and justice for Black people and, by extension, all people. We are unapologetically Black in our positioning. In affirming that Black Lives Matter, we need not qualify our position. To love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting the same for others. We see ourselves as part of the global Black family, and we are aware of the different ways we are impacted or privileged as Black people who exist in different parts of the world. We are guided by the fact that all Black lives matter, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women, who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. I would like some further information on what men are centered means. We practice empathy. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context. We make spaces family friendly and enable parents to fully participate with their children. We dismantle the patriarchal practice that requires mother to work double shifts so that they can mother in private, even as they participate in public justice work. What does that look like? We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. What does that mean? And where is father in that statement? We foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual unless they disclose otherwise. We cultivate sorry. We cultivate an intergenerational and communal network free of ageism. We believe that all people, regardless of age, show up with the capacity to lead and learn, and we embody and practice justice, liberation, and peace in our engagements with one another. So there are little statements and comments in this mission statement that leaves me a little cause for pause in regards to the family unit, in regards to what their platform is. What do they want to do to improve the lives of Black people? What are their goals? They have a lot of things that they make space for and that they stand up with or want seek to dismantle. But what exactly and how exactly are they doing this? And are they receiving money for this? This is what I think is a concern for our people, for the Black community. I think Black people need to understand what their cause is. And if we don't understand and if we don't agree what our cause is, then how are we going to stand up against others, against racism of others?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just listening to all that, like it starts off sounding like something that's for Black people. We're saying, okay, we're all about anti-racism. It's all about blacks. What happened with Trayvon Martin? We're against police brutality. And it's great, and it slowly devolves into agenda-oriented things that aren't necessarily related to Black people. And I have nothing against the LGBT community. Just no reason to have anything against them. But the thing is, it makes it sound like that's a bigger focus is more on the LGBT community more so than it is on the Black community. They're even saying they're putting Black trans women, having a bigger emphasis on that, than I guess Black trans men. But the point is that in the Black community, that's not really a major issue. Unfortunately, if anything, the images that are being put out for Black men is typically to try to effeminate black men, and try to emasculate, black men. So if anything, we need to be focusing more on how do we build up more masculinity in the community, have more of a balance between the masculine and the feminine. Because right now there's a huge imbalance to where we're more of a matriarchy right now, when there is more of a feminine energy in the community. You need to have a balance, and just historically, that has been the agenda, has been to take down black manhood. So when I'm hearing, part of their agenda is more focused on, gay rights and LGBT than it sounds like about black men's rights. That to me is a major red flag and a concern, because that doesn't really fit what the needs of the black community are.
And it almost seems as though someone who was not black wrote this. Because if you really think about who is in charge of the African American family as a whole in general, it's typically single black women or black women. If you think of the heads of households in general, and I'm not gonna, I don't have stats right now. I'm talking off of my heart and in my anecdotal experience, but it's generally the female who is in control of the family unit. So to talk about this notion of patriarchal society and how that's a cultural thing that's not necessarily really even related to black people, a lot of black people. And is that a good thing? What do y'all think?
Well, obviously, obviously not. I think the results kind of speak for themselves. We've had black community be pretty much run by a matriarchy for decades now. We've kind of said, well, we don't need the black men in the household. A lot of black women have said, it's not a bad thing necessarily that you're a strong black woman, but that connotation behind it has kind of been that I'm so strong, I don't necessarily need a man in the household. And some of that could be a defense mechanism, because you just don't have a father, so you have to take on both of those roles. But that's not something that we should be celebrating, because at the end of the day, plenty of studies have shown that it is far more beneficial for a child to have a mother and a father in a household than to have just one or the other. And then even I think you go back to even some of the laws that have been put in place. We talk about the welfare laws that have been put in place, to where you can't receive welfare if there's a man in the household. And so those things were put in place, in the '60s by Lyndon B. Johnson. It's during it's part of the Civil Rights Act. So you know those things have actually had an adverse effect on the black community, because it's kind of incentivized people to push the man out of the household and to destabilize those families. So to me, just hearing all that stuff, it sounded like something that was, it may have been written by a black woman, but I think it doesn't sound like someone that was written by someone who really understands the black experience. And because I mean, if you talk to a lot of black kids, a lot of black men who've grown up, they'll talk about the fact that they wish they had their dad around, and that they missed out on that. And so to me, that does sound like someone who's just not informed about the true issues going on in the community.
And they might not be informed about the black male experience.
Fair.
And so we have to be thinking about why are people out on the streets protesting? We're talking about black men. I'm not stating, and black women. I mean, think about Breonna Taylor, who
Right.
got killed in her home. But
It is
we
predominantly black men, though. Let's
it,
be honest with that issue.
and we have to think about the greater, like, we have to think about the fact that a lot of the issues that are within our community are a lot greater and convoluted than how we present. There is definitely an issue of police brutality against black males and black women, mostly black males. At the same time, there's a lot of other issues within our community that we continuously fail to talk about. And that is going to continue to keep us from being successful. It's going to continue to keep us from thriving in this society. And we have to come together and realize what those things are. Community.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we got to start holding ourselves accountable. I think that's probably unfortunately, that's probably one of the biggest issues we have as a community, as a group, is that we're very quick, and understandably so. We hold everyone else accountable, and if you say something that's racist, or we're very quick to jump on that. That's good, and we need to have that, but we don't have that same accountability, I don't think, for ourselves as a community. We don't have standards for ourselves, saying, hey, let's not have all these kids out of wedlock. Let's make sure that someone's raising our children, the right way. We have crime infested communities like in Chicago, not just Chicago, but just, in different areas, but Chicago's definitely a hotbed. We don't say, what, we need to crack down on that. We got to get the gang violence out of here. What's causing the gang violence? But yeah, I mean, you talk about the gang violence you have in Chicago. And so, you got to think about where that gang violence comes from, right? I mean, gangs generally occur in not only impoverished areas, but also in areas where there's no fatherly influence. You look at a lot of ex-gang members. One of the things they'll tell you that drew them into that is because when they were growing up as a kid, they wanted to feel like they wanted to belong to a group, but they also wanted to have some kind of like fatherly influence, someone to kind of guide them, and they didn't have that, and so the gangs kind of offered that sense of almost like a paternal figure for them, and that's what kind of led them into it. In addition to not having a father in the home to steer them away from that. So I think we really got to take a hard look at ourselves and say, what do we need to do as a community to help ourselves, to strengthen ourselves, and so we can better combat things like police brutality when these things occur. Why is it that we even have so many white officers in these communities? And we haven't. And there have been some cases where there have been black officers who have been charged with police brutality and been caught up into it. But we got to really look at ourselves and say, what can we do to strengthen ourselves as a community so we can become more self-reliant and we just become better organized as a whole. And I think until we do that, we're going to continue to have these problems.
Along those same lines of what you were saying, that about black police officers who might also engage in police brutality, I honestly believe that the black community needs to look at ourselves and see how we contribute to racism within our community. One more time. I think we as black people need to look at ourselves and examine how we as a community, we as individuals contribute to racism in our society.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I mean, there's definitely systemic racism in America, and you definitely have external factors. But I think we're at a position now where I think in the '60s, and obviously before that, there was a lot more. The issues are more external. It was more about not having an opportunity to really progress. And I think at that time, I think we're tighter knit as a black community. We work together better. And if it maybe is out of necessity, but we did. But I think now that we've kind of accomplished a lot of the things externally that we needed to in order to have opportunities to progress in society, we have to really look at ourselves and say, okay, well, why aren't we progressing? What can we do to take advantage of some of these opportunities that are out there? Because I mean, honestly, if you are a black person in 2020, you can't tell me that that you just, if you want, there's things you want to do that you just can't do it. So yeah, there might be additional obstacles here and there, but if you want to become an attorney, if you want to have your own business, if you want to become a president, whatever you want to do, you can do that these days. I mean, just legally, there really aren't laws in place to prevent you from doing those things. But a lot of times we do things these days that are kind of self-sabotaging and holding ourselves back. Even just the mindset we have about what is considered to be black versus what is considered to be white. So it's like if you're trying to get an education, if you're reading, or if you're just doing anything that's kind of like more intellectual, we oftentimes prescribe that as being you're acting white, or you're doing this, or you're doing this. It's not black. So we just got to change our overall mindset to try to focus on things that are going to enhance the community and make ourselves stronger and more prosperous. And then, yes, you want to still deal with outside factors, but first and foremost, deal with things that you can control. You can control how you act. You can control, how you handle your own community. And I don't think we're doing a good job of doing that before we worry about the outside issues.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I believe that within our community, the this notion of Black Lives Mattering is very convoluted. I think it's easy for us to look at one way that Black lives are being impacted through police brutality. But there's so many ways in which our lives are being impacted negatively. And I think that, like you said, it's important for us to look at our role in that. Not saying that systematic racism and racism of others is not a huge part of our problem.
But that's the
Ha-
easiest thing to change is
but the,
what you do.
but the easiest thing for us to change is what we do. And when we become a unified front, then we could work in an organized manner to making change from others. And I'm not saying that this movement isn't instilling change, but changing the names of buildings and changing the names of baseball and basketball teams and putting Black Lives Matters on the streets of outside the White House only goes so far to help the individual child or young man or young woman better their lives and stay alive. Okay? So we got to come with it and become better at our strategy to improve ourselves and our community if that is what we really want to do. And to be really honest with you, like I said, believe that Black people have to take a look at themselves and examine how we contribute to racism, how we contribute to the erasure and the demolishing of our community. What does it mean to be Black?
Yeah, no, you raised some good points. So, I mean, this is a good discussion, and like I said, hopefully, this will spur some thought in the people to say, hey, maybe we need to think about this whole Black Lives Matter movement in a different way, and start also thinking about what we can do better to help our own society. So, hopefully, we'll see some of that change come to fruition.
And for those of you who do not agree with what we are saying or who find some fault, I think a lot of times when you hear language like this, people are quick to be like, "Oh, you a sellout," or "Oh, you a Uncle Tom." That's what people are quick to say without actually expressing your logical thoughts and your dissenting opinions or your opinions that don't agree with what we're saying. Instead of doing that, we're quick to label, we're quick to cancel. And that is not going to help us.
Yeah, you got to have diversity of thought in the community if you want to strengthen it. You need to be here from different sides because everybody has a different perspective on what it means to be Black and how to fix the problem. So that's only hurting us if we're not willing to hear from all sides.
So we want to hear your thoughts or your comments on what our discussion is. We definitely didn't delve into anything specific entirely, but we definitely want to continue this conversation. And if anyone has any questions or thoughts that you want us to expound upon, let us know in the comment section.
And as always, stay against the grain.